Okay. So what the heck is this rugged thing all about? Here's my obligatory, this is 2 ways you can tweet me. So I just added this because there was a lot of debate in the last 24 hours over what the heck is this rugged thing and how's it different than security, and I love the way you phrase it in a nuanced way. There's no unbreakable code, there's no secure code, and when you make it a binary thing, it's take it or leave it. It's really hard to do it good enough. There's no finish line. But I think the point is you want to be able to get stung 1,000 times and still be okay. You want to get bit by a cobra and still, just take a quick nap and recover. So, but I think the reason I love the intersection of rugged, which we started many, many years back with the Rugged Software Manifesto, and DevOps, is it's Honey Badger that cares, right? So Honey Badger don't care, Honey Badger cares. And I love the empathy at the heart of DevOps, and I believe that's the permission and the opportunity, the window that we need for security to finally get to be a valuable contributor to things. So I don't think anyone should care about security for security's sake. In some ways it's like oxygen, it's invisible, nobody knows it's there until it's not there. Right? So I like to start a lot of the talks lately talking about motivations, right? Everyone is motivated differently, and I think one of the historical failures of security, oh, by the way, I'm gonna talk really fast, especially with my tech delay, but it's okay, because in the DevOps world, you better get used to it. But I'm motivated differently than other people are. But what I've noticed in my career is that any strategy that depends upon a change in human nature is going to fail. So you can't try to make someone care about what you care about. You have to understand what they care about, and we're all motivated differently. The hacker culture is going through massive upheaval right now because some do it for glory, some do it for money, some do it for making the world a safer place, some do it for activism, and we're not all getting along. So I think instead of changing people's values, we should understand and embrace them. So for me, I want to make the world a safer place. That's what gets me up in the morning, and I take it very, very seriously. So you've all seen this, cliche. It's a really profound statement from Andreessen, and he means something very, very different. But as a longtime hacker culture security guy who's deeply concerned about saving lives, and I'm not kidding about that, I can't see this as software is eating the world. I see it as software is infecting the world, right? We're putting software and connectivity onto everything in our life, right? The Internet of Things is the Internet of hackable things. It's the Internet of broken things. I did a TEDx called Swimming with Sharks because we are getting in the water with apex predators, and we're not ready for that. So I don't want it to be a negative message, because if software was purely bad, we would never do it, right? There's a cost and a benefit and a risk and reward. And I had to repair my deck, my patio at my house, and all the wood was rotted, and I had to buy new nails, and the nails were galvanized. Does anyone know why you galvanize nails? To stop it from rusting. But did you know that I had to go back to the store to buy more because the act of making them galvanized makes them brittle? So there's a trade-off. When you want tensile strength, you don't use them. When you want weatherproofing, you do use them. And I want us to look at software a couple years from now as we want all the benefits from software and connectivity without unacceptable risk, right? So we already place trust upon them. We want to make it more worthy of said trust. Now, one way I look at this is, if you look at last year, I think it's undeniable that it's been open season on open source, and many of you were affected either personally or professionally by the bug known as Heartbleed, and it had a pretty logo. Aside from shattering the long-held false belief that with all eyeballs, with many eyeballs, all bugs are shallow, there's clearly an open source problem, and it's not so much that the code is all of a sudden vulnerable, it's that attackers have taken notice. And while this one got a logo, there were actually 41 unique vulnerabilities disclosed in the OPENSSL crypto project last year alone. I stopped counting this year, but there was actually a really bad one about 2 months ago as well. So when there's a little bit of blood in the water, sharks circle. And you see this often with project after project after project. Now that we have massive dependence on these shared pieces of value, and open source is awesome, right? There's no going back. We can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. It's that, why do bank robbers rob banks? Well, that's where the money is. And why would I attack open source? Is because everyone is deeply dependent upon it. And there's lots and lots of bugs. One of the things I like to point out, though, is that many of these bugs affected industrial control systems, which are nuclear facilities and water treatment plants and things that can really cause damage. Now, that's not the scary part, right? Our dependence is there. The scarier part is that they're unpatchable. About 50% of the original day one bugs got fixed within about a month. And over a year and a half later, the last 50% still have not been patched or fixed. So what we have is increased dependence on open source that's vulnerable and attackable without the commensurate defensibility or patching or life cycle to handle and respond to failure. And this isn't just there. In my research on the Internet of Things, we've now confirmed the presence of exploitable OPENSSL in medical devices that can kill you, in industrial control systems, in automobiles, and in our homes. Shell shock just made it worse, right? For a lot of you guys, especially if you saw the research about how many of the Docker file containers had remotely exploitable vulnerabilities in them, one of the reasons is something like Bash is going to be baked into every single OS. So if you've got a particular container or a particular OS or a particular AMI before a certain version, if you don't have a baked-in automated security check for the Bash bug, you're basically being born prone. Now, one way I like to put this to folks is I was talking to a bunch of people in the government. It was a bunch of UK people and US Department of Homeland Security people. And we had a workshop on the fact that we really don't, well, I'll get to that in a minute. But it came to me that, remember the Haitian earthquake that killed 230,000 people? It was a 7.0 Richter scale earthquake. It had huge amounts of humanitarian relief. And it got a lot of news for weeks and weeks and weeks. And most of the world responded in a humanitarian way. What got a whole lot less coverage is just about a month and a half later, there was a much stronger earthquake, 8.8 Richter scale in Chile. One of the reasons you didn't hear about it is almost nobody died. There were 3 less decimal points on the death toll. It was 279 people. And of all the people who researched why did this happen, why would a much stronger earthquake have 3 less digits of death toll? The primary contributor amongst many was building codes. It wasn't the presence of earthquakes, it wasn't the magnitude of earthquakes, it was insufficient building codes. So a really bad earthquake in Chile cracked the foundation. A really bad earthquake in Haiti flattened buildings and killed lots of people. So we were talking about this, and I thought this was a perfect metaphor for digital infrastructure and software. We don't have building codes for building code, and we're certainly not using high quality building materials. So it's not going to be the presence of attackers or even the magnitude of attackers, but are we ready to have resilient, defensible, rugged infrastructure? So this is something I don't expect you to read, but many years back, in response to the Agile Manifesto, we were at a party at RSA, and I noticed there's an entire new application security industry popping up that was almost completely redundant to the rest of the security industry. And we pulled up the Agile Manifesto, and there wasn't the mention of adversary, there wasn't the mention of attacker, there wasn't a mention of any of these things. And it wasn't to make fun of Agile. I said, why did Agile take off? And then they said, well, it makes people's lives easier, right? And they had a really simple affirmative value that they could employ. Everybody with hands on keyboards wanted to be Agile. So we talked about it for many martinis, and we ended up coming up with Rugged, and we wrote the Rugged Software Manifesto. And it's not that long. I encourage you to read it. We really meant this less as a methodology and more like a Hippocratic oath, just like doctors take, of the awesome responsibility that comes with writing digital infrastructure. Now look up at the ceiling, guys. We're going to do this little exercise. Not one of you sat here in perpetual fear that this building was going to crush you, right? It's made of steel and concrete, and we're able to depend upon it. It's invisible to us. When you drive over a bridge to get home, you're not going to worry if that's going to collapse. We're able to depend upon it. And the simple idea here was that we're becoming as dependent on software as we are in digital infrastructure. And it needs to be designed with that in mind, that earthquakes exist and you need to be able to handle them. So it's aware of the environmental conditions within which we find our software. Now, my favorite line as a security guy is I recognize my code will be attacked by talented and persistent adversaries who threaten our physical, economic, and national security. Now, my development friends, they have a different favorite line. They like this one. I recognize my code will be used in ways I cannot anticipate, in ways it was not designed for longer than ever intended. Okay. Now, this is a partial truth, and it had a lot of early adoption in the security community. CISOs found this was a much more business-friendly way to talk about security. There's another huge reason why we should do this, though. Security is a negative. Why would we talk about a negative? It's a cost, it's an inhibitor, it's friction. So even in just the tonality of calling something, rugged, resilient, defensible, survivable, longevity, maintainable, it's all the itties that we want within quality. So we have a more affirmative way to talk to our stakeholders. Now, this has actually gotten worse since we first wrote it, though, because, okay. since then, while that truth was very profound, it's actually become more prophetic than we thought. And we've actually started an entire new group with a different group of folks called I Am The Cavalry. And the basic recognition is the cavalry isn't coming on matters affecting public safety and human life and connected technologies. So we have entire projects on automotive cyber safety. We wrote a 5-star automotive cyber safety framework. We're working with various medical device manufacturers and regulators to make sure medical devices don't kill you. And that spirit is carrying forward. So when I talk to you, I'm not simply talking about the app you're going to write for an Android on iOS. The software that you're writing in this room's culture is going to be the ones that can rise to the challenge where packets meet flesh and blood, where bits and bytes can affect life and limb. So I take this very seriously. Now, in the business context, Gene Kim and I recognized this a while back. I know you guys all know and love him, but before you even knew about him, he was the inventor of Tripwire, a security tool. And he had written amazing, mind-blowing studies on visible ops to look at what high-performing IT and IT security organizations were doing. So when he came to me with DevOps, I said, guys, this is the end of security as we know it. The twist, though, is I said, well, maybe that's a good thing. And this is how most, this is a photo from that day. Whoops. So we were trying to put our heads together. How can we take the security community who thinks this is terrifying, reckless, and irresponsible, and tell them it's not necessarily bad, and this might actually be the moment we've been waiting for 30 years, the likes of which we will not see again for another 30 years. You know, will Dev and Ops embrace us with open arms and give us a loving hug? So this is how most people see security in DevOps. We've been working on it, right? I got to give a hat tip to Pete, who showed us this most mind-blowing. He won the internet for like a month, I think. So take your picture. I actually can't stand this slide other than the fact that it's hilarious, because this is a really negative attitude from security people. And at an evolutionary fork in the road, security people who have this attitude are going to fail. They're going to die out. And some of the talks we have assembled for you today and Friday are going to show the more modern, adaptive, evolutionary strategies that people are using to kick some serious ass, right? So this could be your job for security people if you embrace DevOps this way. We'd like to suggest another way. Now, one of the reasons that security people hate it, I'm going to give up on this clicker, is the cycle time squeeze, right? So when we were doing waterfall and then we went to Agile, where we did the design and test cycles really iteratively in short cycle times. Now that DevOps is basically Agile for everybody, it's been really problematic for security technologies. So if it takes 4 days to submit a static analysis of your code and you're deploying every 4 hours, that's not going to work. And a lot of the security teams are taking their traditional test cycles or different traditional approaches that are very much at the end of the life cycle, and they're trying to force fit them into these cycle times, which is never, ever going to scale. And I'm actually happy it's shattering doing the wrong way, because it forces us to think about shifting left and doing it a better way. So it is terrifying for them. But just as a point of why we shouldn't hold on to the past, when I was an analyst for the 451 group, I totaled up there are 160 security product categories. I put them into 5 buckets. And the height of the square is how much money we spend relative to others on things like antivirus and firewalls. The thing we spend the least money on, by far, is application security. The thing most attacked by adversaries is application security. So I want to say that one more time. We spend the least money on the most attacked thing. And I don't think money is a proxy for awesomeness, but it's actually even worse than that, because when I was talking to all my AppSec friends, most of that money is spent on the 10% or less of the code that we write. We really don't write code anymore, guys. We assemble it from third party and open source, right? Those are the Lego blocks and the starting points and the bricks. The code we write is the mortar and the glue putting it together. So we were spending the least amount of money, and we were spending it very poorly on 10% or less of the code that we are actually writing ourselves, instead of focusing on the heartbleeds and the shell shocks that are the overwhelming majority of our attack surface. So the good news is this might be an opportunity. Or we can keep doing the same thing over and over, expecting different results. So we try to prime them. This little chunk here is the 5 things I say that we have tremendous common ground with the DevOps culture, value set, and movement. This is areas the security teams can find to hug it out and actually drive value. Number 1, they like to instrument everything, right? Now, when I was at Akamai, I was Director of Security Intelligence. We would instrument things like fan speed and CPU temperature on our servers. And a 5% difference in fan speed could be treated as an indicator of compromise from an extra process running. And we would scorch that server, that rack of servers, or even that region, because we could orchestrate and deploy from bare metal so easily that I could treat that slightly suspicious anomaly as a security event. So instrumentation and random telemetry is kind of awesome, and DevOps people just have no problem collecting and measuring everything. Number two, and you're going to hear about this a little bit from James Wickett, but the be mean to your code mantra, right? The transformation of the Chaos Monkey in the Simian army, and Chaos Kong and Gorilla and all the different Janner and conformity monkeys, but spelled slightly differently. James helped Netflix initially, but write Gauntlet, which is a barrage of automated security tests that you can do pre-deploy and unit tests. The Twitter guys made Brakeman. So this culture and attitude that we want to be tested, we want to get in a fight, we want to be able to see how we can handle failure. Fail early, fail often. If it hurts, do it a lot. Those kinds of attitudes are incredibly useful injection points for security people. Complexity is enemy of everything. We all hate complexity. So some sort of drive and desire to eliminate elective complexity, optional complexity, avoidable complexity, help stability, availability, maintainability, and security. And then one of the things that kills me is one of your other speakers this afternoon, David Etchew. He and I keep doing things to modernize and be tip of spear for what's the single best way we can extend and advance our really good security program. And 90% of the advice we want to give is predicated on the idea that they know what they have, they know when it changes, and they have no unplanned changes. So it's Visible Ops 101 from Gene Kim's original work. If you don't know those three things, 90% of the advice we want to give you is useless. So as a foundational notion, not a change management database, because we heard already from Adrian that those never work, but the idea of having some single version of the truth, things like Chef, Puppet, become change management. And then the empathy is the heart of everything. So when someone says, Josh, is DevOps a culture? Is it a process? Is it a technology tool chain? I say yes, of course. But the greatest of these is the empathy. I think at its heart, it's the empathy. And it doesn't come naturally to geeks and security people. But man, is it transformative. In fact, I would say the killer app for the Cavalry being so successful with working with governments and the auto industry has not been our technical prowess. It's been the heart of an ambassador and translator who said, how can I help you first? And then once we've earned that permission and delivered value, then we have permission to be asked in return. So I think the empathy really, really helps. Now, if we kick it up a notch, I really think this is the year that things have tipped. And one of the reasons I believe so, besides the fact that we're here and folks like Adrian are pulling us in, it's that John Willis types and Damon Edwards types and Jez Humble types, they're finally saying, you know what? We really can't go faster or be better. Something's slowing us down. We've kind of hit the upper echelon here. Maybe we could look at something else. So this year, we ran a one-day track at RSA, the largest security conference in the world. It was free. We had 700 people come in, and we said, let's pull in Jez and some of the others to see if we can take these chemicals, put them together, and see what kind of chemical reactions happen. And the chemical reactions were amazing, right? Not only did we have common ground, we started coming up with not only product ideas or tool chain ideas, but maybe entire companies could be born out of just a few of the interactions that we had. So Gene's initially saying, okay, let's pull in Jez, and then he's like, what the heck did I get myself into? Which is killing my timing. But now, back to that Andreessen point though, so I don't think this room necessarily cares about security as much as I do and wakes up every night, saying, what do I do about this thing in cars? But I think the way that Nicole was getting it is that security will certainly never drive business value, but maybe software and IT could, and DevOps is where this is starting to happen. But the notion here, when you talk to CEOs and boards, why they're interested, in fact, we did this Pacific Crest thing with a bunch of investors, and man, were there a lot of questions about DevOps. Now, why would a bunch of investors who aren't technology people care so much about it? It's because it's driving transformative business value. And I think one of the reasons is it's really the last frontier of innovation and differentiation. So what that means is you in this room, you probably care about all these different words and then some. But really at the heart of it all, it's about going faster, right? In theory. The problem is it's not about just raw innovation and how many lines of code can you produce. It's about net innovation, like how much value can you produce. And the things that is the difference between the two are quality, security, things like that. So I've been trying to say, let's build on Gene's, love of technical debt, right? Technical debt, people grok technical debt, right? We know it's messy. We know it compounds over time. We know that we can have technical debt bankruptcy. And perhaps we talked about that with a friend of mine this morning. So this level of complexity is Maven Central, the largest open source repository in the world. It's Java code, and I'm the custodian of this. My company is. And it's a mess. It's turtles on top of turtles on top of turtles all the way down. The transitive dependencies are, this is an actual graphical representation of it. And most of the world's open source is built from this. So my idea is, even though we want to go faster and faster and faster, at some point we're crushed under the weight of that complexity. And I wondered if there was some way that this rugged tribe, as a killer app, as a first offering, could drive actual business value instead of just make security less painful. And the answer was hell yes, and I'm going to show you how. I'm going to give up on my clicker. So you can't do a DevOps talk, especially if you know John Willis, without a Deming quote, right? I think it's the law of the universe. But I'm actually independently a huge fan of the Deming stuff. But I latched onto a different part of it than the inspiration for Lean. I mean, most of you guys know this, but he tried to go to Detroit and transform and revolutionize the US auto industry, and they ignored him. So he went to post-World War II Japan and said, if you follow my lead, within 5 years I will heal your economy. And a textiles company, Toyota, followed his lead, and in 5 years to the day, they saw the tipping point. And some of those transformative ideas have made their way into Lean, they made their way into Agile, they made their way into DevOps. But I think we haven't really had a full embrace of Deming, and I hope to nudge you over the edge today. So back to those things that developers care about, or that different people care about different things. You know, for me, it's about making the world a safer place. For developers, I want to be on time, on budget, with acceptable risk, and the last one's kind of negotiable, right? It's really I want to be on time, on budget. So let's speak in those terms, because if you're a developer, Heartbleed was not a security event. It was unplanned, unscheduled work with context switching, which was psychically painful. It made me late for my sprint, which might have made us late for our roadmap commitments to our customers. It might have cost us time to market. It might have cost us massive deals with financial services institutions. So it wasn't a security thing. It was unplanned work. And for an ops person, it wasn't a security thing either. It was a break fix. It was a service interruption. It hurt my bonus because I didn't get my mean time to repair stats in the conformed thing. It took too long to identify across 6,000 applications which ones might have had that version of SSL. So I can continue to be a shrill, hysterical security person pointing out this is a security risk, or I can show how really good hygiene in our software supply chain could maybe dramatically reduce unplanned, unscheduled work, fewer break fixes, and faster time to recover. So we've seen this a few different ways today, but there's the water fail era, which is where I started in software. Then Agile, nothing's more Agile than goats. So I tried to make a little model here. If the three things we care about are being on time, on budget, with acceptable risk, Agile made us really, really fast at the dev tests, but we made shelfware really, really quickly, right? So in a lot of cases, it was just sitting with ops for a very, very long, long time. So when the DevOps Pandora was let out of the box, now we had something like continuous delivery. DevOps was Agile for more of the organization, right? It's not a transformative thing per se. It's a logical extension of the promise of Agile, and now we were on time and more efficient. And what I'm trying to suggest is now we're at the crossroads where we can have a fuller embrace of Deming. We can embrace some of the supply chain principles from Deming, and perhaps we can add in software supply chain rigor to be even faster, even more efficient, but massive gains on quality, maintainability, and attack surface. And it's not something where we're robbing Peter to pay Paul. And it's not a fiction. This is working. So one of my financial services relationships, he's tried this for 1 calendar year. He had a 30% boost in productivity across 2,000 developers. This is board level attention. Name another security project that wasn't bad, like a failure, that got board level attention for driving value. Now, he didn't pitch it as a security thing. He pitched it as a hygiene thing. In fact, he referred to some of the supply chain intelligence as the consumer reports of software projects, open source projects. And they would have a list of invest in these projects, divest in these projects. It was that simple. 1 year of saying these are projects we like, they have good hygiene. These are projects we don't like, they're redundant or have poor hygiene. 30% boost in year 1. So if you're an enterprise architect, a dev lead, and you want to somehow start crushing your bonuses and stats, this is an easy way to do it. So let's put this in a non-security context. Here's the Toyota Prius versus the Chevy Volt. Okay? The analysis from the Toyota supply chain books at the time said it was 61% cheaper than the Volt. They sold 13 times as many that year. And then they only built about half as much of their car as Chevy did. So they built less of their own car, So that sounds good for profits, right? But the part that should blow your mind is they only had 125 suppliers versus 800 for the Chevy. So think about the baggage of maintaining that many suppliers. But here's the even better part. They made 10 times better use of each of those suppliers. So with fewer suppliers, they built less of their car. Now, could this be that last untapped value point for our software delivery shops? You know, healthcare.gov, you know, besides all of its IT failures, it had 11 different logging frameworks in one project. 11 different logging frameworks. I don't know why they didn't just go for one of every single logging framework, but think about that. So in a fuller embrace of Deming, I'm basically going to say if we use fewer and better suppliers, we use the highest quality supply from those suppliers, and we track which parts go where, how could that translate into the Heartbleed scenario, right? Now maybe you have to use that project, but do you have to use a really old version of it, or can you keep current on the freshest of ingredients, right? One thing we like to say is open source ages not like fine wine, but like milk, right? It spoils really quickly. Especially when you get that blood in the water effect where the presence and revelation of one in a project tends to lead to significant gold rush to find more and more and more vulnerabilities. So typically you're going to have to patch a lot after patching the initial one. And the tracking which ones are where, there's an on-the-record quote from the Department of Homeland Security. I guarantee you the UK government had the same problem. It took 6.5 weeks to determine which of the different parts of the federal IT had Heartbleed in it. 6.5 weeks just to find, not to remediate, just to find. Now, it takes about 6 hours for the really serious attacks to start manifesting once a bug's known. So 6.5 weeks just to identify. Now, that same guy that I said got 30% boost in productivity, it took him 6 minutes because he had a bill of materials of all the open source projects used in every single thing in his application portfolio. 6.5 weeks for mean time to identify and remediate, 6.5 minutes. So we have some choices to make. And despite my IT fail, I'm trying to get back on time. Okay. So, you know, as that custodian, I just want to show you how big of an opportunity we have to do better software supply chain hygiene. We had 17 billion unique downloads from Maven Central last year, and it's just growing from, I think it was 13 the year before, right? And there's no going back. Open source is here to stay. The difference is, from an attacker's perspective, they used to look for a single flaw in your bank website that you wrote in your custom code, and when they were done attacking you, the campaign was over. But why attack you when if I attack something like Apache Struts, I get every bank? Every bank. In fact, that was my watershed moment. I was still the director of security intelligence at Akamai, and most of my customers went down or got an FBI letter, and we had to get pulled into special calls because this was actively being exploited. It was a flaw in Apache Struts 2. Having it anywhere in your class path, regardless of how it was used, made you vulnerable. So before Heartbleed, this really blew my mind because I didn't really realize how pervasive open source had gone. Especially in government and financial services, it used to be, they were very reluctant in highly regulated industries to use that much open source. But then when I saw that the largest open source consumer in the world is Morgan Stanley, it's not just for, you know, startups and unicorns like Netflix anymore. So I looked in, just like to prove that gold rush thing, I looked at the history of the Struts project, and not only was that bug there for 7 to 11 years, latent without those many eyeballs finding it, what I noticed is that the frequency of bugs found in the last few years and the severity of bugs found, you could do this for pretty much any project in the NIST database. The CVEs, or the unique vulnerabilities, are climbing in frequency and severity for nearly every open source project. And it tracks pretty well the popularity. Now, the one that really hurts me, and this is affecting UK government as well, is Bouncy Castle is a crypto library. So it's written by security people with really high security rigor. They take their security very seriously. It's used in security use cases, and David's going to talk a bit about crypto later. But this had a very serious remote code execution flaw 7 years ago. They fixed it right away 7 years ago, and despite it being fixed for 7 years, I still see about 4,000 organizations downloading the broken one every day. It's in very popular social media sites, it's in very big banks' websites, it's in intelligence community infrastructure. It's a pretty serious problem that's entirely avoidable. So when I hear about Chinese kitten-killing APTs or advanced persistent threats, I can't be bothered. We're not even fixing things that have had a fix available for 7 years in high security intelligence community use cases. So we really have to do better. I consider this a public health issue. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip some of these stats. But we also survey how good is the supply chain hygiene for most open source consumers globally. We do it once a year. 75% don't even have a plan, let alone executing it. So one other thing we do with OPENSSL is it's not just you consuming third-party open source risk, it's your supply chain of commercial vendors. So this was a mapping of Cisco and IBM and HP and everybody, and without picking on anyone in particular, we wanted to see response times to the OPENSSL flaw. And basically the horizontal is how long it took, and the vertical is how many products they simultaneously fixed. You'll notice the upper and to the right one is 120 products fixed 110 days later. So IBM, and the size of the circle is something else. But basically like 100, this is a phenomenal response time. This is probably as good as I've ever seen, but they were fixing 120 products 110 days after Heartbleed came out, when most exploitation was in a few hours. So the response times of this were phenomenal, but what I saw was that very same struts thing that took down most of the bank customers I knew. IBM WebSphere didn't fix it for over a calendar year. In fact, while we were at RSA, the largest security conference of the year, a security appliance shipped that day, a year and 2 months after Heartbleed, with Heartbleed in it. These are security companies. So one of the things that became clear to me is because this is turtles stacked on turtles, it's not just your own consumption of third-party and open source software supply chain hygiene. It's can we put that pressure on our commercial vendors to also take good care of the supply chain. In fact, it goes one step further, which is Dan Gear is an idol of mine, and he and I looked at my data together, and we wrote a report on how's the project integrity of the open source projects themselves. So when you pick something like Struts, it's not a single project. It pulls in tons of dependencies as well. So we had two questions to ask. When an open source project has a direct dependency with a vulnerability in it, number one, how often do they fix them? Because they don't all fix all of them. And it's actually terrible. And two, more importantly, how quickly do they fix them? What's the MTTR, mean time to remediate? And the answer was, across the entire population of Java projects, only 41% of security defects get fixed ever. Less than half. So if you're depending on an open source project, it's at least half of its exploitable vulnerabilities are probably never going to get fixed. Now some of them have excellent hygiene, some of them have terrible hygiene. And the mean time to remediate was over a calendar year. It was 390 days. And if you look at just the really severe ones, the CVSS 10s, 10 out of 10, it was slightly better, 224 days. Now, I want to remind you, Heartbleed was a 5. So this is essentially terrible. Now, if I could start to publish, if I did it right now, I'd be murdered. But if we were to start to publish which logging frameworks fix all of their bugs within 90 days, and which logging frameworks fix none of their bugs, would that have an impact on which logging frameworks you chose? I mean, clearly functionality matters, and clearly API stability matters. But if you knew the hygiene, and they're both free, would you maybe act differently? And I'm banking on yes. So there's several layers here of picking better suppliers, picking the freshest of ingredients from those suppliers, and tracking where they go. We believe it translates into tremendous benefits. So here's a terrible visualization of a tool I'm having a friend write this weekend. But imagine if you pick these different projects, how many versions of each of those projects do you have in production? One of the banks we know is using 81 versions of Spring. There's only 85, I think. A friend. God bless you. Whereas Google tries to strive to have one and only one version of a library in production. They end up with 2, but that's pretty good. 2 versus 81. Now think about the supportability, the maintainability, the help desk calls, developer portability from project to project. And as I said earlier, you might be using 6 or 7 logging frameworks in the same app, let alone across projects. And then we did the first ever State of the Software Supply Chain report. We find that the average application has 106 projects in it, and 25% of them have a critical or high known vulnerability in it. So figure about a quarter of them are going to be bad. And as you actually explode it, most repos we see have 7,000 projects in them, times maybe 12, I think is the average number of versions of each of those in the repos. So there's clearly opportunity for dropping down some of that technical debt, security debt, potential risk, simply by choosing fewer suppliers. And if you don't have any way to prune out suppliers because you're legacy code, you could at least try to focus on maybe fewer versions of those. And the gains you get from that could be significant. Okay. Now, last thing I'll say is in the US and the UK and the insurance industry, there's a harmonization around this idea of software supply chain hygiene. So this is a bill introduced in the US called the Cyber Supply Chain Transparency and Remediation Act. And it basically says 3 things. If you want to sell to the government, and by the way, the financial services ISAC, the FS-ISAC is requiring almost the same thing. They're going to reveal it in October. It basically says anything sold must provide a bill of materials of the third party and open source components used in it with their version numbers. So just a list of ingredients. Number 2, that list should not have known security vulnerabilities without a justification. You just got to write it down so your customer knows the risk that they're taking on. And number 3, because future vulnerabilities are inevitable, your goods must be patchable because half of the affected systems in your various governments were not patchable. And the half that weren't patchable were the ones that scared the bejesus out of me, like industrial control systems, vehicles, medical equipment. Now take that against the bouncy castle. The next person that tries to sell something to the government is going to say, oh wait, there's a CVSS of 10, there's a flaw in this library, is there an available fix? And the answer is yes, there is, and it's been around for 7 years, and it's really well tested, and it's API compatible, and we'll start to drain the swamp. So the goods you're consuming, now you could do this today with your own procurement, but I think this is the untapped thing that makes you faster, makes you have fewer break fixes, faster mean time to recover. Whether you care about security or not, your business will care about the benefits of supply chain hygiene. So the 2 little words to focus on, and I'll come to a close. Known vulnerabilities, right? So we don't have to go after this zero-day espionage, advanced sophisticated attacks. And if you need some proof point, the last breach report from Verizon, the data scientist friend of mine put this one thing in there a lot of people skipped. Last year, 98% of the successful attacks, not theoretical ones, successful attacks, tracked to just 10 known vulnerabilities. No 0 days, no sophisticated attacks, 10 known vulnerabilities, CVEs. But it's worse because of those 10, 8 of them have had a patch available for more than 10 years. So I would like to suggest one of the ways to take all the awesome sauce from DevOps and make it rugged DevOps would be some really low-hanging fruit stolen from Deming on making sure we tackle and start paying down some of the technical debt and known vulnerabilities. Right? Fewer better suppliers, better supply from high-quality suppliers, and traceability of where they went will lead to less unplanned, unscheduled work, faster mean time to recover, and like I said, one of my experimenting friends did a 30% boost in developer productivity in the first year alone. So throughout the afternoon, we've assembled some rugged speakers for various different aspects. You'll hear from each of them. But one of them found out the hard way, Shannon, from Intuit, by the way. It's an evolutionary necessity to start thinking in terms of a rugged DevOps and operationalizing security. The old way wasn't working, and as a victim of many of the very serious high-profile attacks, you'll see some of that. Then we're going to have a member of the UK government who's doing Agile and DevOps in the government explain how difficult it is to do traditional security and why rugged is a very attractive way to maybe modernize the approach. Then we're going to have James Wickett, one of the authors of Gauntlet, but one of the most rugged developers I've ever met, who is going to show how to do pre-deploy embrace of some of the rugged principles with the Gauntlet tool and how to be mean to your code. On Friday, you're going to hear a compatriot of his, Nick Galbraith, who's going to show post-deploy operational security enhancements that rugged can help drive. And then to close out today, we have David Etchu, who's going to be talking about, since you're often responsible, I think Nick likes to put it, operational pain can neither be created nor destroyed, it can only be passed to someone else. I amended that to say you can create operational pain. David's going to show how, since a lot of the burden of doing security falls to now the developers in a software-defined everything kind of environment, he's going to show rugged building materials and some of the basic principles that you're inheriting now that you're doing so much orchestrated, automated deployment of infrastructure. There are several other awesome talks on Friday as well about rugged, including Chris Swan and some others. But I want to end with, I don't know what motivates you, but I hope you are now motivated. And thank you for your time.